Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you all about UNU's social media and communication activities. Our presentation today is communicating research for the SDGs, global and domestic social media strategies. First, to introduce ourselves, my name is Lisa Takagi, and I'm the Japan Outreach Coordinator in the Office of Communications at the United Nations University, and I'll be presenting on the Japanese social media side.
Hi all, thanks for joining us today. So I, as mentioned before, manage English social media, and that of course our audience is more global. So I will be talking about our global audience strategies.
Here's what we'll be discussing today. First, we will briefly introduce the United Nations University, or UNU, and the Office of Communications. And after that, we'll be discussing the UNU English and Japanese social media activities. First, the United Nations University is a research institute that promotes research to help solve the challenges that we're facing today. And second, it is part of the UN system, which consists of various agencies such as the UNDP or UNICEF. And lastly, it is also an academic and training institution that conducts graduate and training programs. So UNU is in a very unique position of being both an academic and research institute while also being a member of the UN system. So this allows us to be the bridge between academic institutions as well as the UN system. So UNU consists of 13 institutes located across 12 countries. The global UNU system is coordinated at the headquarters here in Tokyo. And one of its unique features is that the institute studies all 17 goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, also known as SDGs, adopted by the UN in 2015. And as you can see, we have some institutes in Asia, the Americas, and many in Europe and Africa. So for the role of Office of Communications at UNU Center in Tokyo, implements and oversees UNU's web presence, content development, visual identity, branding, and media relations in Japan and globally. And the Japan Outreach and Media Team manages and disseminates all UNU Japanese communication activities. And we currently have a document called the UNU Global Communication Strategy 2020 to 2024, which provides the overarching framework that aligns communication work across the UNU system.
Great, thank you, Lisa. So I'll talk a little bit more about what the goal of UNU is and how social media relates to that. So UNU effectively, if you boil down the goal of the university, it's to influence policy that can have an effect on the SDGs or on global issues around the world by research. And so where communications comes in is, of course, we take that research and somehow get it into the hands of either organizations or policymakers that can make those changes. And there are a variety of different outlets for that. Of course, we have our website, we have events, we have newsletters, and then, of course, as we're talking about tonight, we have social media. So social media objectives could be broken down into about 4 different categories. So outreach, of course, and then more direct promotion of our research. When we are doing this on social media, we generally have more direct calls to action to actually check out our research or to share our research with somebody who might be interested. And then, of course, direct calls to action for events and academic opportunities. And then more general awareness. So, of course, people see our name, United Nations University. They say, oh, United Nations, of course, I know what that is. University, of course, I know what that is. United Nations University, what is that? So that's our goal. It's not just to only raise our profile, but it's to explain what we do as well. And as far as awareness goes, that's generally more so done through campaigns, a bit more so than kind of the day-to-day, which I will talk about a little bit later. But of course, these strategies, to be successful, we need to know who we are targeting and who our audiences are. So Lisa, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So our audiences on social media are essentially the same as a whole compared to our other outlets for communications. and these are listed, as Lisa mentioned, our global communication strategy. But you will see there are 3 here that I've bolded, and of course, all of these audiences are very important, but these 3, I would say, are targeted a bit more heavily on social media. And the reason for that is, so students won't necessarily, who knows, could happen, but won't necessarily be directly influencing policy. But they are fantastic amplifiers on social media. They are very, very active. And so they are great at really sharing our research on an exponential kind of flow. And then, of course, academics and researchers, they are maybe not quite as active as students on the whole, but definitely there's been a trend in increased activity. They also have fantastic networks with other researchers, with other research institutions. So they are definitely somebody that we target. And then, of course, the UN system, as we are a part of the UN system, and with other accounts for UN agencies on social media. It's kind of a rising tide floats all boats or lifts all boats kind of situation. We share their posts, they share our posts, and it kind of raises the profile of the UN and the work that the UN is doing as a whole. That being said, all audiences are important, and there's no account or no person that we disregard. Anything, you never know who anybody's connected to, you never know what networks people have. Any sort of engagement is always greatly appreciated. So as mentioned, I'll talk a little bit now about kind of the divide between day-to-day activities and campaigns. So as I said a little bit earlier, day-to-day activities are generally more direct calls to action. We are usually providing links to either PDFs or articles that we have posted on our website, or that may have been published on third-party outlets. And then also more direct calls to register for events or for applying to academic programs that we have at our 14 institutes across the globe. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of supporting other UN organizations. And that's not only through sharing, retweeting, commenting, things like that, but often the UN organizes global campaigns that we kind of chip in and contribute to as well. And on that campaigns note, we also have campaigns that we coordinate throughout our global network of our research institutes that we have. And those generally can range from something as short as 1 day, or they could even extend to something to more of a month or so. And those could be global or local. It depends on what the topic is. And that's also due to the fact that most of our research institutes, they're focused on a specific area. And some areas are a bit more narrow in scope, or some campaigns are a bit more narrow in scope, and some are a bit more inclusive. And as mentioned, they're often aligned with international days and events. An example of that is International Women's Day, which I will talk about in just a little bit. But as mentioned, campaigns is really more about awareness. So what we want our audiences to be doing when we're talking day to day, generally we are leading people off of platforms. We want them to be going to our platforms or places where they can access our research. And then campaigns generally live more so on the platform. We want it to kind of grow and populate within the platform itself. And as mentioned, there are a few different campaigns, global campaigns that we run with our institutes across the globe. They're, I would say, on an annual basis, usually around 6 or so. So we usually do something around International Day of Women and Girls in Science, around International Women's Day, World Water Week. We have a lot of institutes that contribute to work on water. And we also have a lot of institutes that contribute to work on gender equality. And then we also have a lot of institutes that are contributing research on climate change. And we also have institutes and researchers that participate in the Climate Change Conference, which is also COP, as you may have heard of. And then there's, of course, more campaigns around the calendar. These are usually smaller in scope, maybe a day here, a week there or so. So, Lisa, if you go to the next slide, please. So International Day of Women and Girls in Science and International Women's Day. So International Day of Women and Girls in Science is, I believe, February 11th. Yes, February 11th. And then International Women's Day is on March 8th. So we have, throughout the years, sometimes we've done both individually, sometimes we've just kind of done one long campaign from the start of International Day of Women and Girls in Science throughout International Women's Day. And the reason why these are very important to us is not only because we have a lot of research on gender equality, but we also have a very good gender balance of researchers in the university. And so our goal is to promote women researchers, and so they can be shown kind of as role models for girls that are interested in science, for International Day of Women and Girls in Science, or other women researchers as well for International Women's Day. So if you look at the posts we have here, this is an example of how we change and iterate our post designs year by year. So you can see in 2019, this was, I believe, kind of the start of the general, or the current design kind of flow, if you want to refer to it. And it was very focused on the researcher with a very short quote, had fairly good engagement overall. But we noticed that some of them that had more, I would say, quotes that could live on their own and didn't have people go back to the text itself were a bit more effective. So we said, okay, let's do a design that can have room for longer quotes. We did that in 2020. And then so we said, let's see what happens if we just go full quote. We went 2021 and said only quote, no photos. We saw engagement dip quite a bit as a whole. And so then for this past year, we went back to equal quotes and researcher, which we found good success on having equal focus there. But we are not able to do this unless we are accurately monitoring and evaluating our success, which of course not just important for campaigns, but also for day-to-day activities, which I'll talk about now in the next slide. So there's a few different ways that we measure our success. Of course, we use Google Analytics for tracking anything where we're leading people off platform onto our platforms. And then we also use a tool called Talkwalker, and this is for both monitoring, for evaluation of campaigns, but we also use it for media monitoring. So we also place high importance on monitoring any place that we are mentioned in the media. And so then we can pick up on that and then plug into that conversation on social media, which is also very, very important, not just globally, but especially in Japan, which I believe Lisa will talk a little bit more about now.
Thank you, Brent. So the main role of using social media for Japanese communication activities is to increase the awareness of UNU and UN entities in Japan to our Japanese target audiences. So as mentioned by Brent, although our main headquarters is located in Tokyo and many UN organizations are also officed in the same building, this is generally still unknown to the Japanese public. And so since the main role for UNU Japanese communications is to outreach and raise awareness, the Japanese social media content will be different to that of our English social media accounts. Not only are we promoting UNU, its institutes, research, events, news, and publications in Japanese, but we are also trying to connect to our Japanese target audience and help them understand what UNU does and how it relates to their work and daily lives. So for instance, we are currently working with the Senior Vice Rector of UNU, Dr. Shirahase, on an online conversation series called Big Ideas, which is a series that promotes mainly to students and academics in Japan about UNU, the SDGs, and UN organizations in Japan. In addition, we often promote and collaborate with one of our institutes, UNU IAS, the Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability, because it is our only institute located in Tokyo and also provides both English and Japanese content. Also, as an UN organization in Japan, we also use our social media to promote other UN organizations by reposting their social media posts, and their content will either be already translated into Japanese or only provided in Japanese. So for instance, we frequently repost social media posts from UNIC, which is the United Nations Information Center, as they upload a variety of UN-related content. For example, posts from the UN headquarters, from the Secretary General, as well as other UN organizations. And in addition, we also try to promote UN entities that are not in Japan. So we translate their posts into Japanese and help promote their presence in Japan. And also, I think a unique aspect of the Japanese side of our Japanese side of social media is being able to promote in-person events. For instance, we recently had International Tea Day event, which was hosted at our building. And we also held a booth at the farmers market in Tokyo. So as for target audiences and expectations, we do have the same social media accounts as the English ones, Twitter and Facebook. But for us, we recently started LinkedIn and to reach out to Japanese professionals, students, researchers, as well as policymakers. So although our strategy is quite similar to that of English social media, there are some differences. Firstly, we do not have the same posting schedule. For the Japanese side, we set it up to JST time, while the English posts are targeted mostly to Europe and the Americas. And second, as I mentioned before, the Japanese side, we use social media to increase awareness to our target publics about UNU, UN entities in Japan, as well as Japanese content about the SDGs and other UN activities. And lastly, our Japan media and outreach team work very closely with the Japanese government and policymakers, especially with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They monitor our communication activities and we send them quarterly reports. And we also notify and update them on new events, press releases, and media activities. And I want to point out on neutrality on social media, especially on the Japanese side, because as UN is, as I mentioned before, UNU is in a unique position of being a research and educational institute and also being part of the UN system, and thus can be seen to be representing the UN. As such, the UNU must maintain neutrality on social media. So we are very careful not to repost or retweet social media content that promotes specific political views or controversial policies. We often collaborate with the Japanese government on social media accounts. For example, some Japanese ministries often promote our events and press releases on their social media accounts as well. However, when we reciprocate, we are quite selective in what content we can repost or retweet. We try to choose content that is related to UN activities, the SDGs, or have some kind of connection or collaboration with one of our institutes or UN organizations. So as you can see on the slide, for instance, one of our institutes, UNUIS, often collaborates with the Ministry of Environment. So we will promote posts like this to our Japanese social media accounts. As for day-to-day activities, every day we check and repost posts from other UN organizations in Japan. For instance, any events or translate material or publications. And we also set up and translate posts from our institutes to Japanese and retweet and repost them. So for instance, as shown on the slide on the right-hand corner, this is from one of our institutes in Europe called UNU EHS, and we provided a short translated blurb on the top and about the post. And we also research in advance any UN days and conferences and events in the coming weeks. This is so we can create original Japanese content or use the material provided by the UN headquarters and promote international UN days and other campaigns to increase awareness to our Japanese target audiences. And like our English social media posts, we also promote any student training or workshops. However, we tend to mostly focus on Japanese language-based workshops, seminars, events, and lectures. And lastly, to increase awareness of UNU and the SDGs, we also promote recent and past articles from our web magazine called Our World, which is also provided in English and Japanese. As for campaigns, we work very closely with the English social media side and our whole team at the Office of Communications For big UN international days like International Women's Day or World Refugee Days, usually English posts are made first and then translated into Japanese, or sometimes we only create Japanese content. For instance, for International Women's Day, as you can see on the slide, as Brent has explained, the posts were collected from other institutes. However, we didn't have much Japanese submissions. So we provided the Japanese translations above the English social media posts, and then it was retweeted and reposted on our Japanese social media accounts. Lastly, for Japanese social media, we try to keep in mind with Japanese holidays as well as days of remembrance, such as like the Tohoku earthquake. And we also keep up with current domestic and international news and then connecting it with the UN SDGs or UN research. So for example, recently on July 18th, which was Marine Day, a Japanese holiday, we translated a research article about the ocean from one of our institutes, and we promoted it on our social media accounts. So we kind of connected the UNU research to the holiday to reach out to our Japanese audiences. So this brings the conclusion to our presentation. If you'd like to learn more about UNU, the research from our institutes, our newsletter called Insights, and our web magazine called Our World, please check out UNU or Kokuren Daigaku on our websites and social media account. We greatly appreciate your attention today. Thank you.